video, we're going to be doing a Q&A style video with Mr. Gary here with Braille Batteries, because I've seen a lot on the social media pages from ours to the motorcycle audio pages, questions about batteries, and I'm no expert. I know I've always leaned on Gary here, so figure what better opportunity to discuss batteries, not only your guys', but difference between AGM and lithium and some other good information than talking to the expert here. So thanks, Gary.
Okay, no problem. Glad to be here. Share the info.
Absolutely. I know there's a big need for it in the market. I'm sure you follow some of the audio pages and just motorcycle pages in general. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of questions that need to be answered that I know I don't feel comfortable enough answering. So I'm going to leave it up to you, and we'll have a good conversation, get this information out there then. Cool.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, obviously Braille's been around a lot longer than most people think, especially in the motorcycle market. Some of the guys, the custom bike builders, have been using us for quite a while, mostly the big motor guys, not necessarily the audio. The audio has been the last few years. We've been at it building high performance racing / competition grade lithium batteries since about 2009. So for us, the last 12, 13 years of doing it, we've pretty much done it all. We've seen it all. Most of our batteries are on the 4th generation as far as lithium technology and just performance, quality, reliability, safety, things like that. We kind of started at the top in motorsports, so with everything from IndyCar and Formula One and NASCAR, and have kind of trickled our way down into more grassroots racing. A number of years ago, one of the audio guys up in the Chicago or Indy area up there, said, hey, if you can make a battery that goes under the seat that'll play these audio systems for a long time, without them running, and maintain voltage and all that, I think there's a market for that. And so we're like, well, we already make the battery in that size. We use them in race cars. We've been starting big drag cars with our 9-pound, 8-9-pound lithium batteries for a long time. So they've got enough power to start a 900 cubic inch blown pro mod drag car with nitrous and 5-stage nitrous pumps, fans, and all this other crazy stuff. No charging system, so it's got to do all that work and then rapid recharge and then do it again and again. And even those guys are getting 7 to 10 years out of the batteries, just beating them up like that. So it was kind of easy duty when we start talking about this kind of world. So like I said, the big motorbikes obviously love it, because most of the time they build these custom motorcycles and the battery's an afterthought. We also seen that in vehicle or the bikes, just like what you're dealing with. Harley was pretty smart in putting a big fat battery under the seat that can run audio systems and have a lot of capacity. And then a lot of other bikes that are similar end up putting the smaller, like a 20L size or even smaller, which is similar to what we've obviously had to deal with that situation, is that they put a battery, it's like the size of a Softail, in these other bikes that are touring bikes. So there's obviously not a lot of power and capacity to be able to do that kind of work. So it's created a lot of problems. The harder you work any lead or an AGM battery, the shorter life it lives. And they start degrading within usually a couple of months of using them. And a lot of guys call up and they're eating through batteries every year. So obviously there's a benefit to lithium as far as longer life and that sort of thing. So that's kind of how we started out. And like I said, we've done just about every racing globally. We supply OEMs like Corvette. You see in the back there, 12 consecutive years. We power Ford GT program that just wrapped up. And so we pretty much, like I said, seen and done it all. And so it's cool for us to be able to work the only American made premium grade lithium battery. Everybody else is pretty much branding stuff from overseas. And you get what you pay for. So there's definitely cheaper options out there, but just like any parts, as you're aware, whether it's engine parts to audio parts, there's low, medium, and premium grade products, and so it just kind of depends on what your budget is, your goals, and if you want the best, then most of the guys have come to us, and we get dealers all the time, that want our product, and once they see it, they put it in. Seeing's believing. So in a handful of years with zero marketing, zero advertising, we've become obviously one of the bigger players in this whole market, and people have come asking for it just because word of mouth, as you said, on these forums and groups and these high-end guys that have a lot of credibility. They've helped spread the word, and so it's been kind of a win-win scenario for us. So it's been good.
I know, like you were talking about earlier, you said, some people don't realize how long you guys have been in the business, which I was one of those people. The first time I heard of Braille was 4 years ago when I had a Victory, and you guys are familiar with those. And it was Chris Purdue at 309 Customs that I talked to and got familiar with you guys. And I actually bought my first Braille. It was an AGM battery that I put in there. So as you're familiar talking, your Harleys have the bigger, like your 30Hs. Victories, I think you get stuff, what was it, a 20L in that bike?
Yeah.
And now you're referencing to the Indians. They put the battery in the same location, but I guess Indian was like, hey, we're going to make the battery even smaller. So that's where you and I had that dilemma. And after talking to you, you're like, hey, we took a 20L and we put it into a 14 chassis. And that's what I have in my Challenger now. And I've had zero issues with it. I really love the battery.
Yeah, it's pretty common that it seems like I said, a lot of these guys built these bikes with the battery as an afterthought. Not thinking of it, especially in a touring bike. They typically give just enough battery to start the bike and maybe run what it came with stock. When you start putting in LEDs, audio systems, it's just way under batteried as far as capacity goes. Like I said, they get discharged. Usually the charging system's not adequate. So you're usually updating stators and a lot of these things, when you get into more higher draw rates. Things of that nature. So it's nice for us is that most of our lithium batteries, other than some of these ones like the G30H, the ones that we're making for you, the 14 LS, is that most of the time in the car starting batteries and a lot of these others, to meet or exceed what the stock battery size is, if those work, they're not full. Because usually it's like overkill. So we don't go overkill unless guys are wanting the max power and capacity in a certain size, and then we usually add a row of cells. And the G30H, actually, when it first came out a couple of years ago, it actually had 2 less rows of cells. So it went from 24 amp hour up to 30. And that's the max you can fit in something that size, and so obviously more power, more capacity, you can play music longer, voltage stays higher, there's all these benefits there. But we do a lot of AGM too. I mean, we're an American made high performance AGM battery. So like the 30L size is our B3121, for the Harleys, or the 2015 is the 20L size. We sell the 20L to 4 and 6 cylinder street and race car guys. We sell the 30L to everything up all the way up to Corvettes and Vipers, street cars, race cars. Even there's guys out there running Hellcats, things like drag cars, street and strip cars that run our AGM. So it's a good option. It's just that there's a lot of benefits, obviously, to lithium: lighter, better performing, more reliable, much longer lasting. So, the only downside is it costs more on the front end. But when you look at something that's going to last you 5 times longer and perform a lot better, it definitely pays for itself over the long run, because you can put the best audio system on there, and if you got a crappy battery, it's going to sound like crap. And so that's where obviously having higher voltage, not having that voltage sag, it's kind of like switching from pump gas to race fuel for the electronics. It's just everything works better. I've had guys literally pull up to like a booth when we were at a bike week, take out their AGM battery, put the lithium in, and they didn't start it. They just turned on the stereo. And when you see a guy kind of like step back a little bit because he can tell, that's pretty cool. So that's pretty gratifying when we can have guys see an immediate benefit like that.
Yeah, I know the thing for me, like I noticed, and the more research I did is, like you said, your AGMs and your lead acids like only hold a certain voltage, which usually is what? Maybe on the high side, like low 13s, and then you're getting into lithiums and they're holding higher, closer to 14 volts?
Yeah, full charge voltages in that area, typically resting. So once you take the surface charge off, most AGM batteries are like that 12.6 to 12.8 range, whereas lithium's, like a 13.6. So you're a full volt higher, and obviously they maintain that voltage. So a lithium battery can be at that same voltage at 90% as it is at 20%. So it doesn't matter anywhere in that range, it's still going to start the same and everything else. And so, there's obviously that benefit to just higher voltage just means better audio sound, obviously crisper, amps burn out from having low voltage. A lot of speakers get blown out from low voltage. So there's major issues. And we've even seen that high-end cars that instruments and stuff will fail due to low voltage. And the flip side is we've seen factory teams like Ferrari and Corvette say that the everything they see on the data, from data logging, engine management, ignition system, everything works better with lithium than it does with AGM. So there is actually that benefit. Obviously in racing, the weight savings, you go from 21 pounds down to 9. So it cuts it less than half, and to have that much more power and to last that much longer, you know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I know. Speaking of weight savings, I bought a handful of batteries from you, and I know I have the 30H lithium, but then I do believe we talked and I picked up, I already have it in the car, it's the 30 equivalent AGM, because I talked to you about that. We put it in my good friend's El Camino that we're doing right now, and weight savings alone isn't even comparative. I wrestled with the AGM trying to get it where we wanted, and now I have the lithium, and I'm like, I could just throw this wherever I want. It weighs like nothing. It's huge.
Yeah, it's a big difference. In that you've gone to a battery that's still half the size and weight of most car batteries, you know, so it's amazing. You go from a 40 to 45 pound battery down to 21 for like the B 3121 or 30L size. And then you get to the lithium, you know, which, like you said, is under 10 pounds, you know, and so you can just grab it by one hand, just plop it right in. And then, like I said, they start faster, everything just works better, you know, and so for guys that are adding any sort of electronics, which is really across the board, whether it's an audio bike, it could be a big engine bike. It's all of these new modern vehicles, street and performance vehicles. Is the more electrical demand they put on the battery, the more important it is, you know, to have something that's going to deliver high stable voltage. So the industry, just by default, by adding so much stuff and being so electronic, you know, intensive, and the demands are getting higher and higher. Stop-start vehicles, you know, they stop, they shut off, they still got to power, you know, the radio and the AC and all this stuff, and then it has to start it back up. You can imagine what that just beats on a lead battery, you know, and so it's kind of created a market just, you know, from the dynamics there to come up with a better solution. And we've, like I said, outside of racing, we've done, you know, a lot of military vehicles, so lightweight stuff. You know, the demands of motorsports, military, things like that are so extreme that we build all of our products to those same levels. So, you know, reliability is key, and our failure rate is annually is less than 0.5%. And usually it's just from a guy like, I let my bike sit for, you know, several months and didn't put the charger on it. You know, like, well, obviously you fully discharge it. There's parasitic draw from the alarm, things like that. And I said, you still got to use the charger to keep them charged up. But if you keep them charged, we've had customers call up that have 9 and 10 years on it in their street car, their race car, and it still works like new. And I'm like, hey, you still probably got many, many years left if you just keep doing what you're doing.
Now, speaking of the battery maintenance, as you just kind of touched on it, what are your recommendations, whether it's an AGM or a lithium battery? Like, what are recommendations to keep them maintained properly?
Pretty much as a general rule, if you want to get the max life out of any battery, they will all benefit, you know, regardless of type, if they're maintained or kept at or near 100% state of charge. The more you start cycling them and you deep discharge them, which obviously you do with audio, so that's just the nature of the beast. But as far as normal use goes, general rule of thumb is, hey, if you're not riding it, plug it in. You know, I mean, if it's something you ride every day, you don't have to worry about it. If it's at least a few times a week, don't have to worry about it. But when you start getting into a week or two, it's always best to just plug it in. If you know it's going to be a little bit, or there might even be a chance, and it could be the same thing with a car, is that if you keep that battery at or near 100%, it's not being cycled, it's not being drawn down. And so all batteries are based on cycle life. And so when the deeper you go, the more often you cycle them, the shorter the life the battery will have. Lead AGM does not like to be cycled so much. So the more you start doing that, the shorter the life goes, you know, it just drops off. Lithium can be deep cycled, still get thousands of cycles versus several hundred. So literally can last 8 to 10 times longer and do that. But that being said, you know, keep it at 100%, it's not being used at all. And so lead batteries degrade with age, typically have a few year, depending on, you know, how they're used and the size. Even in cars, you know, 5 years is usually pretty good, you know, but they don't last much longer than that. Lithium is based on usage. So in a bike that's not used all year round, for most customers, I would say. They probably sit in the winter unless you're down here in Florida or something like that. You know, a lot of them, they sit for that amount of time. So it's based actually on service life. And you can get upwards of 15 years out of a lithium battery based on its cycle life and depending on how long it's used. Even if some are used every day, you can get 10 years out of the battery. If it's not used every day, then it just extends the life of the battery.
Perfect. Because I know growing up, there was always this misconception, you know, I know my dad always talked about it. You're like, hey, if you always keep them supercharged, like it kind of builds a memory and like it ruins the battery. And then over time, you're like, okay, well, then the narrative was like, hey, discharge the battery, charge it, it helps it stable. So now I guess that's a good reason to ask you, because you know there is that misconception. And now I see people on the forums, and it's very specific to Indians lately. I don't know if it's with the batteries they're putting in the bikes, but a lot of people are having battery issues.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern was, everybody on the page is like, oh, I always keep my bike on a tender. I always keep it on a tender. My conception was like, well, if you're keeping it on a tender, that's hurting the battery. So I guess with what you were saying is that's not necessarily the case, or does it kind of depend on the charger?
There you go. Exactly. I was just going to sing that up. So just like we're talking about the quality of batteries, that is exactly the case with chargers. So there's definitely low end, medium, and then there's premium grade chargers. So that is one area. If you get a premium battery, you definitely want to have a premium charger. Even if you buy a regular battery, typically, you know, I would say generally speaking, if you're talking about a motorcycle maintenance charger, which are typically around, 1 amp, they're not obviously high rate like a car is usually around 5. Typically to get a decent charger, like a 1 amp, 2 amp, something like that, you're probably going to be in that neighborhood of about 60, 70, $75. Anything that's down in the $29.99 range, $19.99, that is just bottom of the barrel. You're not, all it does is it keeps putting voltage in the battery, but it does not condition them. And this is very critical for AGM batteries, more so than lithium. But we do see a lot of failures of lithium batteries due to low quality chargers as well. So the maintenance side is every bit as important to getting long life out of it. So on an AGM world, and that at least that we're familiar with, there's other brands out there that are really good, but TechMate, C-Tech, those are very well known, good ones, Schumacher. So there's a few of them that are the premium grade, and then there's a lot of your average ones, and there's a lot of low end, just cheap stuff that get brought in some weird brand or whatever. But that's not the place to be cheap. It's kind of like buying a nice car but not really getting an oil change all that often. It's like there's a lot to conditioning, desulfation, and things like that with all lead/AGM batteries. A lot of people think an AGM battery, because it's sealed and it's maintenance free, that it's not a lead acid battery, but it is. It's the same type. It's got a cottonous fiber that holds the acid in suspension. So if you broke the corner off, it doesn't just spill out and go everywhere like a flooded wet acid. It doesn't corrode and gas. So they're better for sure. But then lithium is just a totally different animal. They charge at a higher voltage. So this comes to one question you hear a lot of guys are like, okay, if I need a lithium charger for my lithium battery, how come I don't have to change anything on the bike or in the car? And so we get that quite a bit. The difference is that a charger, like a lead charger, AGM, typically they're set at a set voltage and at a set current. So let's say it's a 1 amp charger, and for lead, it's going to be 13.2 volts at full charge. And with lead, they do a pulse rate. So they put in current, they back it off. They put in current, they back it off, because obviously the lead will start getting hot if you start forcing it, current. So there's the two things: there's amperage and there's voltage. And a lot of people get the things confused, like, well, I kept, a good charger, it kept voltage. Well, amperage is the other half of the equation. So if it's not putting in the right current, or it keeps putting in current, you can end up cooking and degrading your AGM battery or your lead battery. So their charger quality is huge. Lithium is totally different. It's a full volt higher. So you're talking 14.2, 14.4 at a constant rate. So you can just put in, if it's a 1 amp charger, if it's a 5 amp, if it's a 25 amp charger, you just blast thing, and they're like a sponge. Whatever the charger puts out, at least with our stuff, not all lithium batteries are created the same. So just like with AGM batteries or lead, there's a big difference in quality. We'll get back to that in a second. But as far as chargers go, there's a lot to it. Lithium's like a gas tank. So that's probably the easiest way, is it's just an electronic gas tank. It fills up It's full. The only way with ours is they lose less than 1% a month. So if they're disconnected, sitting in a box, they're, we've had them sit for 5 years, still be at 13.5 volts, same cranking amps, just about 50% just need to be topped off. Whereas a lead battery, if you don't maintain them at least every few months, putting, just from self-discharge, they'll go dead by themselves. You want to keep them on top of them. So there's that aspect of it. So charging is every bit as critical. If you're using it all the time, then like I said, chargers don't come into play. But the thing is within a bike, in a car, is that all the charging systems have a regulator. And so they adjust voltage and current based on the demand, right? And so they typically charge in around 14 volts, 14.5, which is really what lithium is, right in their sweet spot. And amperage is based on how much draw there is. So when you put an audio system on, it's pulling a lot of current. If you're not putting out enough in your charging system, obviously you can start using the battery as a power supply. And lead doesn't like to start, if once it starts to get down to about 60, 70%, they fall on their face, which is why a lot of guys will go bar hopping, and they'll have their stereo on, they'll stop. And about the third or fourth stop down the road, they're crossing their fingers, hoping that it'll start, Well, lithium, that all goes away, because of the discharge portion of it, which we talked about, which we have that image on there. If you want to pull it up for a second, we can talk about, this visual really, I think, will help people understand the difference between the, how lead works or AGM versus lithium.
Awesome. I'm going to pull that up right now.
Yeah, there we go. So you can see right there, we've got all three different types. We got the flooded is the gray line, black is the AGM, and then the blue is the lithium. And so you can see there that, both lead and lithium, or lead and AGM, once they get down to about that, a third, 65%, give or take, when it starts to drop off the slope there, they'll still power the stereo and power electronics and lights, but when you hit the start, when you put a high load on them, they just fall on their face. So you can see from the lithium, not only is it a full volt higher, but it maintains that constant voltage. So even at 20%, you can be playing your tunes for a while, which I hear these guys are like, man, it's unbelievable. I played my stereo for like 2 hours and the thing still fired right up. Well, you can see, obviously, based on that. Now, capacity is another aspect where a lot of guys, will put big sound systems on. And that's a matter of whether you need 1, 2, or even 3 batteries to have enough capacity for the amp draw and the longevity and how loud you're playing it and all that sort of things. But you can see right there just how much better lithium is. And it also, back to the charge rate, it can take constant current. So they charge much more quickly. So when you start the bike, you're going down the road, it literally will charge 3, 4, 5 times faster to get it refilled back up, versus lead is very slow to take a charge. That's why when you usually put a lead charger on a battery, it's like, let it sit for half the day to get back up. Our lithium batteries that, if it's at 50%, you can put our 6 amp charger on and it'll charge up in a couple hours, but the nice thing is that even if you ran them down really low, like you see on that graph, they could be down to 10% and they're still going to have the same cranking power and still fire up right away. Whereas, if you tried doing that same amount of runtime with either an AGM or lead battery, it's long since past what its ability to be able to start, which is why a lot of guys have to carry jump packs and things like that, which is not a good thing, that's a whole nother topic that, jump packs are never a good scenario. They're a necessity at times, but what happens is it'll start the bike, it'll start a car. But the problem is that, the charging system is not made to recharge a dead battery. So what happens is it goes 100% duty cycle, and that is definitely a great way to burn out diodes or the stator, even the regulator, is they're not made to do that. So the only proper way to safely bring back any battery, lead or lithium, is put a charger on it and let it slowly charge back up and go through its normal routine. If you have to jump, you have to. But when guys do that over and over again, it's twofold. Is it not only is it bad on the charging system, but now the battery's being hit with much higher current. Whatever the charging system can put out is trying to force into a very low discharge battery, and then it ends up getting the battery hot, especially with AGM. lead, and it ends up cooking the battery. Like I said, lithium can take it much better, but you don't want to ever run any battery so low really that it won't start.
Yeah, that's funny you say that, because I know growing up as a kid, like I didn't really pay much attention to it. You always see that person, like your car would die and somebody would jump you off, and like, oh, man, I'm going to let it run for 10, 15 minutes to charge it back up so it's good. And there's that fallacy for so long, and then you get older and you're like, yeah, it's just for maintenance. It's not there to, handle dead batteries. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's essentially, like I said, it's made to start and maintain and keep a battery charged. So that kind of gets back to the maintenance side of things, that if you keep it on the charger, it's at 100%, you fire the thing up, the charging system does not now have to work to try to recharge a discharge battery, a low battery, because people are just too lazy to plug in the charger, whatever it may be. So you're going to pay with shorter battery life by doing that, both on the charging system side and on the battery side. So it pretty much always links back to that. But, that's the same thing with jump starting or jumper cables. Let it, like you said, let it sit on for 10 minutes while the other car is running. The problem is now it's really working, the charging system of the other vehicle. But the problem is it's not regulated current, right? So let's say it's putting out 30 amps. I mean, you're force feeding your battery with a car, with an alternator here, and it's not really designed to do that. So it ends up, that it cooks the battery, and pretty much anyone who starts jump starting, if you've done it more than a couple of times, the battery never lives past that. And it's because it just damages them. It's really bad, and so it's no different than, over revving your engine. We're always taking it up the red line all the time. Life of the engine's going to go down, the more you run it to that threshold. So that's obviously one of the big things there too.
So just to clarify, when we're talking about the maintenance and the chargers, you're saying customers, when it comes to also the batteries, like you got low, medium, higher quality batteries, the chargers are the same. You have low, medium, and high. So is there any recommendations as far as like a brand of a charger? Because I know pretty much any shop you go to, there's battery tender. Like it's always there. And I've always seen it. I personally stopped using about 5-6 years ago and went over to a desulfating type that does that and the maintenance. And now I've switched over to the NOCOs, the NOCOs. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But is there any recommendations you would have as far as brands are concerned, regardless if they buy an AGM or a lithium? When I buy my lithium, I've always kept your guys' chargers, because I buy the battery from you, I'm going to buy the charger from you. So,
yeah. Well, and it's cheap insurance. I mean, we always sell most of our batteries, especially ones for the bikes, as a combo, as you know. So we end up throwing in the 6-amp lithium charger for $50. Basically a cost. They're normally $157.49 is retail. Usually map price is like $150. So it saves you $100 on the charger. We've obviously made tens of thousands of lithium chargers over time. We almost virtually never get them back. So we were actually one of the first ones to really develop a lithium charging technology through a partner of ours, a supplier. And we've actually shared that algorithm with a lot of golf cart companies, things like that, as lithium batteries started becoming more common because they do charge so much differently. And there's a big difference. Yeah. So the battery tender brand, it's kind of like the Kleenex of or Xerox of chargers. Great at marketing. They've got a great name. Quality wise, they're definitely about the bottom of the rung, as far as that goes. And so similar to your experience, like I said, people can go buy them if they've had good luck with them. Great. It's not like we're saying we're here and we never bash anybody. Just realizing that it is definitely a lower quality charger. So it's definitely not one we would recommend. The NOCO stuff definitely seems to work really well in the AGM world. The one problem we see is that they have one that claims to do it all. And they've got one that says it does AGM and lithium. And we've seen a lot of lithium batteries get taken out by that charger. So when it comes to premium grade chargers, you typically want to stick with one that's just a lead/AGM charger, or you want a dedicated lithium charger. They're just totally different. So whether it's us, C-Tech, Optimate, as far as the lithium side goes, when you jump into the AGM side, it could be those same ones. We obviously have AGM too, but it would be those guys. And then along with a NOCO, we definitely say they seem to be really good as far as AGM or lead batteries go. But we don't recommend the one where you push a button and it switches to lithium, because it just does not seem to work. No one's really gotten that down because they're so radically different. And so, some people have good luck. The Schumachers, like I said, has been around for a long time. So there's definitely ones, but like I said, price definitely dictates almost all the time quality. And as you were talking about, there's chargers, and then there's maintainers and conditioners and things like that, and so like even like the TechMate, they'll bring back dead lead batteries or AGM batteries like 40-50% of the time. So there's definitely a lot to that side of things. We don't sell them, but we definitely work with a lot of distributors that sell a lot of people's stuff. And that's just feedback we get from big distributors that obviously deal with a lot of chargers, at least in that space. So there's definitely nothing bad to say about that, but you definitely want to be careful. Your Harbor Freight special, not the one you want to put on your premium AGM or your lithium battery. I can just tell you that much.
Awesome. I just wanted to clarify that for a lot of people, because I know I went through that experience in my last job when I was in Florida. We did a lot of electrical and generation. That's really where my experience got brought up with the desulfators. And ever since then, I literally had a battery, a lead acid factory one from Victory, brought it completely back to life. And I used it for another year and a half before I sold the bike. So that's where my eyes really got open to chargers. So I really want to just take a second and talk about that and everything. So I really appreciate the clarification on that. And I hope that answers some questions for some other customers. But from here, I just want to hand it over to you and let you fill us in on everything, kind of some of your knowledge to the people on as far as your batteries and everything to help them make the right choice, whether they think they need a AGM or a lithium. And then I know you're a wealth of knowledge. So whatever you want to share, I'll just hand it over to you and just kind of pay attention.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's definitely a lot I could cover. I mean, sit and chat for a long time. It's interesting, as I've been with the company for a little over 10 years now. When I came to Braille, when I moved to Florida from the West Coast, I'd built and raced my own cars for, at that point, over 20 years. So it's been about 30 years now plus. So I knew a lot about cars, but when it came to batteries, I just thought it was just some big heavy thing that gives you 12 volts, like most people, right? I knew nothing. So I was excited coming here because, I grew up watching guys like Corvette, obviously, in the sports car world, IndyCar, same thing. It's like, that's cool. I get to deal with those guys because they buy Braille. And so I didn't know what amp hour meant. I didn't know what that sort of thing was. So I learned. And the nice thing with Braille, in my opinion, is that, we have both types of batteries. So we have AGM, we have lithium, they're both premium grade, they're American made. And so when the customer calls up or they're trying to find the best solution, we have that range. So it's not like we're going to, give you a bunch of marketing hype and, oh, our lithium battery has this widget and Bluetooth and blah, blah, blah. Like all this stuff that you typically will see out there nowadays. A lot of them now are cramming more stuff into the battery, more features. What we found is that the more stuff, you put in, the more failure points you create. So it's not a good thing. We tend to keep things very simple. We use premium grade cells. There's a big difference in the cell types. Most lithium batteries use what we call prismatic cells. If any of you guys ever seen like an iPhone battery or an iPad, RC cars, little silver pouch style, they tend to work, but they're what we consider a consumer grade lithium cell, and they're fairly cheap. And the problem is with a lot of the lower grade stuff, what we consider consumer grade, which is most, is that those cells are just not that robust for vibration. Their operating windows are much more narrow. And they usually have to have a lot of, a BMS or some electronics in there to try to make them all work together, because they're kind of all over the place as far as voltage, capacity, resistance, things like that. Whereas we use steel case cylindrical cells, which is basically like that. So it says Braille, it's a little like a C-size battery. So very light, lots of power. And so like the G30H has 40 of these things in there. And so every single cell is exactly matched to voltage, capacity, and resistance. So it's kind of like balancing your pistons and your rods, right? You want them exactly the same so they play nice together. And so that's the difference with ours versus, when you take a bunch of those cells, the lower grade stuff, and they're all over the place as far as voltage, capacity, and electronically, you're trying to balance them out and make them all work. Obviously, you can see where that in and of itself, just the construction type is not going to be as robust. I mean, do they work? Yeah, they tend to work okay. But they definitely have their downsides. The only plus side for most is that they're cheap. So the initial cost to get into one, but then if the lifespan is half or less and it doesn't deliver the performance you want, it's not that much of an improvement over an AGM battery in some cases. And so that's what we do. We obviously do so many types, so it's the same type of cell that, if we put them in the Harley or, some of these other bikes, cars, race cars, factory is, we have two different types of cells depending on a more energy dense versus high cranking, and so there's always a little bit of a compromise there. So we build to match to what the application is, which is very different than pretty much everybody else. Is that when you buy a lead battery, here's your size, I hope it works for you. We don't know what the performance is. And AGM, as you've seen, there's definitely a wide range of performance, and so same thing with lithium is that you get what you pay for. So, you get a cheaper one, it's definitely not going to work as well and probably not going to last as long. So the cell type, the cell construction, all of our cells and the batteries themselves are UN DOT certified, which the demands for lithium to be certified to be able to ship them by air is so crazy and stringent that it's like there's not a lead battery on the planet that would pass the tests that they have to do. They have to be overcharged at you have to put like a 30-volt charger on a 12-volt battery, not have it do anything bad. So massive overcharge. We do full dead short, which is obviously not going to be good on any battery either if you just freaking short it out. The things that are really impressive is they have to withstand shock and vibration. And we're talking such high loads. We're talking multi-axis 150 G shock loads, which we've seen Indy cars with our batteries hit the wall at 200 mile an hour, hit about 85 Gs. So you're talking about, you'd have to pretty much fly a plane into the ground about 400 mile an hour to hit 150 G, and the battery can't fail. So needless to say, if you put a lead battery in that same tester, it would blow the thing apart and you'd have lead and acid flying all over the place. So it's pretty interesting that they try to make it really difficult to certify them and to be able to ship them, understandably, because of the things you see from hoverboards, Samsung, a lot of things like that, consumer grade stuff that don't have the safety, obviously, that these do. They're internally fused. So if they ever get outside of their operating range, it'll click and basically kill the cell. So it doesn't do anything all crazy. So obviously all those different things are important to us, because if you're in a multi-million-dollar race car, that's running out there, you got a military vehicle, to some guy that's just got, his Indian with an audio system, or a Harley guy or whatever. We want to have that same reliability, safety, and performance in all of our products. So totally different deal there. As far as that goes. And we have that pedigree. Like I said, we supplied almost every OEM factory race team, car series globally. We're huge in drag racing, which that's probably one of the most brutal environments that's out there. That sort of thing. So it's been fun for us to kind of offer the different types of batteries, whether it's a guy wants an AGM battery. Like I said, ours put out as much power and capacity as you can get in a given size. As far as true performance goes. So if those don't work, then it's kind of a natural progression to jump up to lithium. And with us, it's not about marketing hype. It's like, hey, here's the pros and cons. One's heavier, here's this, here's AGM, here's lithium, here's the cost price. And ultimately, we just let the customer decide on which one's going to be best based on their needs and their budget. Whereas a lot of other battery companies, they just have one or the other. They're going to try to sell you on all their, the pitch on why, this one, and you hope it works and that sort of thing. But, we can definitely get into the weeds, and I've learned a lot about, all the different aspects of the batteries over the years. And it's been fun meeting different types of people, because we meet them all. I definitely can say that the bike industry has been a pleasant surprise, because I think there's a lot of, stereotypes when it comes to that, and so for us, it's like, we got everything from your high-end exotic sports car guys, to your race team guys. But really the motorcycle guys, are just some of the most down-to-earth, most considerate, fun, guys that just want their stuff to work, having a good time, so I've really enjoyed getting out there and going to Bike Week for the first time and having a booth out there, Daytona, and getting to meet those guys and talk about, our product, and like I say, kind of get back to what you were saying is when we can sit there, we came out with the product a few years ago, just sat back and said, you know what, let just the quality of the product speak for itself. Let those guys, if they want to talk about it, they will. If they have a bad experience, then they'll tell everybody that's not good. But when you got some big names in those audio circles, obviously there's Carlos at NVS is very well known in that world. Carlos, obviously a distributor of ours, but he only did it just because he wants the best ones out there, and he'll tell you who's, when he rates them all, right? So it's been cool to get that kind of marketing, just through word of mouth. It's factual, and those guys carry a lot of credibility. I say, talk to them, talk to the race team engineers, talk to the bike builders. They're the ones that'll tell you for a fact. They already have the relationship with the customer already. Obviously, hopefully there's some trust there, and they've seen it all to where it's like, let that do the selling. We're not going to try to hype you out. So, it's the best thing if it's not. And so we're very upfront about that. We stand behind our product. It's like I said, it's not just some bulk stuff that's just branded coming, from overseas type of thing. So it's definitely a different deal altogether. But I enjoy that. Obviously the cycle life, like I said, is the big thing with lithium. So I think a lot of people, that's a key thing that we probably don't hit on enough, as a lot of people initially will get lithium, like the weight savings. That's obviously cool. They can hear the difference in an audio system, but ultimately, if you keep that thing charged and you use it normally and maintain it properly, there's definitely no reason you shouldn't get, 3 to 5 times or more, life out of it than you would an AGM battery, and so it will pay for itself. Like I said, the only downside is you got to pay for it on the front end. But when you look over a long, let's say a 10-year plus lifespan, and how often guys are changing batteries, and then to be able to have that performance and stuff, a lot of times it gets rid of headaches, for them. And so it's kind of nice if they're going to store the bike and they disconnect the battery. Like I said, they lose less than 1% a month. Hot rod guys like this too. They disconnect the battery, can sit all winter. They hook it back up, no charger needed, because it'll still be at like 95%. Fire it up and away you go. So there's different benefits to each person that they'll get out of it. But, obviously our goal is to offer the best product, keep it priced reasonably, and we haven't raised our prices in years. So our goal is to just keep making them better. Like I said, we're on the 4th generation. So you can tell me, you've been in different industries there as far as parts go, how many companies would make, 4 different improvements over a 10-year period and not increase their prices? Yeah. You probably can't think of any, because they usually don't do that. Right.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't. And I mean, just even speaking for my own business, I mean, I've been doing it for about 2 years now. And I know we're already, I think on some of my harnesses, I'm on like the 3rd, 4th, 5th revision of that product already. Because like I can tell from you guys, you get that first revision out, you see where you can improvement, you take it a step forward, and you see another opportunity, and you guys are just keep on, seeing those opportunities and making the quality better and better, the product better. I mean, from the batteries that I bought, and I love them. I bought the G14 LS from you, and now I have a G30. And you and I have spoken. I'm going to buy another set of those for the other Indian, because for some reason Indian loves small batteries. I don't understand it. There is more room there, and it just blows my mind, because while we talked earlier, you're like, they're adding more and more things, and I don't know how familiar are with Indians, but they just released 2 new bikes. It's their models. They're the Elites. And essentially what they did is, it looks like they threw their whole accessory catalog at these bikes. So now you're adding the LED headlight, the running lights, the fog lights. You're adding their power band audio system. You're pretty much every accessory they have, they throw at it. And they're still keeping these little itty bitty batteries. And I just don't get it.
It doesn't work. And so really what happens is when you start getting into serious systems, I mean, like the G14 LS that you're using is I would say typically going to be good for a system that's maybe, a couple thousand watts, but that's really about it. You don't have that ability, like with the Harley battery that's twice the size, to have something that will handle a 5,000 watt system, and then there's guys that have beyond that. And then you start adding an auxiliary battery, so some guys are running, in like the Indians, the Victories, things like that unfortunately we're stuck with a small battery, is that they use the smaller lithium for that. And then they end up using the bigger G30H, let's say, you know, and putting it in, whether it's a tour pack or saddlebag or whatever. You know, we pretty much see guys get creative and putting them in there, but it's kind of the flip side is obviously a lot of the Harley guys will use the big one on the seat. Maybe they'll use a G20, you know, a G14 LS that's smaller to add that 50% capacity difference, you know, so you end up with the same net power available. It's just you kind of have to do it backwards on the bikes that you deal with, just because they come with that smaller battery, and you don't want to overwork it. You know, as good as lithium is, you know, that's where people have questions. It's like you want to make sure that you're in that to get the max life that we're talking about out of it. You know, you want to make sure you're keeping within that operating window, so that way you're not eating through batteries every couple of years. You know, you shouldn't be doing that. And they're great. Like I said, they got lots of power. They'll do what they need to do. But when you really start working them, you're going to need more. Especially with these sound systems, you know, these guys are getting crazy. There's one guy, you know, there's some guys that run 3 of our G30Hs. So we're talking some pretty big power, you know, 9,000 watts. We have one guy that has a 20,000 watt bike that has 8 of those suckers on there, you know, so we're talking, you know, 240 amp hour. That's like almost like a semi truck, 3 giant sized lead batteries equivalent to power something that basically will shake the windows off a building, you know, from that quarter mile away. So it's different groups do it, whatever. You know, that's kind of craziness to me, but you know, like I said, everybody kind of has their deal. So it's good for us is that if anyone wants to call, they can call. Usually they'll get a hold of me or, you know, one of the other guys and just say, hey, you know, this is what I've got. What's the best solution? And here's my budget and that sort of thing. And we'll just try to get the customer the best overall, you know, bang for their buck. Like I said, lithium is hands down better in every regard, especially when you get into audio and stuff like that. But, you know, if they need just a better AGM, a lot of guys are very, very happy. And for really the last 15 years, we've sold a lot of our AGM batteries to the custom bike guys, just because it is better than the factory batteries and that sort of thing. Your typical low end, you know, same thing. You can get a $50 Walmart battery, or you can spend $200 on a premium AGM battery. There will be a big difference, you know, in its performance. And obviously with higher cranking power and better performance, it's going to last longer, because as they degrade, you obviously have more time before it gets to a level where it won't work anymore. So you can be cheap, but you're going to go through them all the time, you know, and you've always seen that. Same thing with anything, really. So those are kind of the key factors there, I would say. And like I said, cycle life is huge. So the harder you work a battery, lead, you know, will go from 1,500 cycles down to 500. Versus lithium, you know, you could be dealing at maybe 10,000 and maybe you work it hard and it goes down to 5,000 or 6,000, but it's still going to be that much longer in a lead battery, you know, 3, 5, 8 times even long. It just depends on how hard you work them, but it's considerable. So it is going to be a cost neutral or cost savings over the long run. And yet there's guys, they put a lot of money in their bikes and they're like, the first time they're stuck out in the Florida heat, as you know, and you can't start their bike and it takes 3 hours for AAA to show up. They would have paid the extra $500 to not have to deal with a battery issue for the next 10 years. Right? Oh, yeah. So sometimes it's out of frustration. Maybe it's just like, that's just the one place that you don't want to be cheap, because if you spend a lot of money on your audio, you build a bigger motor, you know, you put a lot of money in your bike and yet you put in a cheap battery. That's the one thing that if it doesn't work, it doesn't go anywhere. You know, and so it's definitely probably the worst place that you can be cheap. And ultimately you put a sound system in, you know, it's a few $1,000s plus, and you have that, like I said, the crappy battery, it's still not going to sound all that good, you know, so it doesn't. So a lot of these guys now that are doing audio systems and stuff, they won't actually do the bigger upgrades without automatically doing a lithium upgrade, because it's not going to work. You know, the customer's not going to be happy, and then their reputation's on the line because they're like, they got the best stuff, but it still doesn't sound that good. You know, and so very critical. So it's been fun for us to come up with a solution like that. Obviously having the smaller sizes for guys and bikes like yours, like you said, they just have more demand. A lot of times they can get away with just that single battery. But, you know, a lot of times they may need, you know, another one of those, or a G20 that's only 3 inches wide. So it's easy to stash somewhere, you know, in a saddlebag or something like that. So, you know, we got a lot of different options, but, you know, it's definitely worth it, as you've seen.
Oh, absolutely. And I know my typical systems that I offer range from about 800 watts to the average customer's max is like 1,600 watts, depending on what they want. So that's where those batteries fit really well. I have one on my personal bike and I love it. And it's funny you touch upon, like, when people put all this money into their vehicles, batteries are overlooked, because before I started motorcycle audio, I was rewiring classic cars. And I'm sure it's like, I can't tell you how many times I had a beautiful car, like super nice done Bel Air or a 72 Mustang would come, beautiful car. As soon as you pull that carpet back, it's a rat's nest. Like, I had all sorts of sketchy stuff in there. And I'm like, it was always the last thing people look into. And I mean, I've seen it in the motorcycle industry. Like, I've seen pictures people post it all the time. Like you mentioned Carlos, he posts video all the time of wiring rescues.
All the time.
Yeah, you spend all this money on a system that costs something like $5-6 grand. They got a stock battery. They have wires crammed everywhere, and it's like, I don't know where the disconnect is. And that personally is what drove me to my businesses. I saw that, and I take such pride in, like, my wiring harnesses, everything loomed. Like, I have customers ask me all the time, like, do you think I'll be good with my stock battery? And, I push them either way, and I tell them, you might be able to get away with it for a little bit, but, like, you'll really benefit from this battery. And that's where I started selling your guys' batteries, because I've used them, I love them, and I like the fact that you guys are American made as well. So it's really important to me when choosing a battery.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, we appreciate that. And so for guys that are good at what they do, take pride in their work. We obviously take pride in what we do here. Everything from, the guys that are in the back there that are, assembling these things and all the work that goes into it. It's pride and workmanship, obviously the reliability. Our customers, like I said, it doesn't matter if they're the biggest, highest end, racing team, all the way to, your guys who's buying his first motorcycle and putting a sound system on. We treat them all the same. We want to give them the best. Like I said, no marketing hype. That doesn't work in our world. We found typically with premium grade stuff, you don't need to do that. It's usually the lesser grade stuff where people try to push a lot of that stuff, and it may not always be factual. But like I said, you go back and you look at our pedigree and who we've supplied globally. No one else will ever come close. I mean, it's just, we were the innovator in motorsports, and then to be able to start breaking off and doing other things like this audio battery. We got the, trucking, marine, car audio type stuff, high capacity. It's just the equivalent of what you've got in a bigger case, so, we're small enough that we're still nimble enough to come up and innovate with new things. If there is a demand for something, we're able to do that, fairly quickly. But yet we're big enough to where we do enough batteries and, with our R&D and our constant development, that we keep working to make it, better and better. And so if there's anything we can do to improve the product, we've always done that. And so you get a better product now than you did a few years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, by far, just as far as, cranking and all that sort of stuff. But the neat thing is a lot of times we'll get guys that after 10 years of beating on them, they finally just warm out, and they send them in, and we look at how they were built, and we're like, wow, we've come a long way, and so just everything about that, the Gen 1 stuff still works. It's just not as good as the Gen 4 stuff we make today, and so it's been fun for us to do that. But, like I said, it's the proof's right there. Guys like yourself, guys like the Carlos and, the others out there that have a lot of credibility, that are out there doing it. They're in the trenches. They're making these systems. They've seen it all. So it's like, we just figured we can just build on our reputation, get into that market, because most people only hear Braille, they've like never heard of them before. I said, yeah, I know. Outside of racing and motorsports or sports cars, the Porsche crowd, the Corvette crowd, guys are always about weight savings or, that sort of thing. They all know about us. But once we're getting into more of these, your general kind of mass consumer, I guess, in some respects, although, obviously the nice high-end bikes is not, what I consider mass either, but there's a lot more of them. And so that's where we were looking at other opportunities to give a better solution. Guys are feeling battery pain, wanted to make it go away, put more stuff on their bikes, make it work better. Whether it's a bike and you're playing your audio and you go to start it and it doesn't start, or you got a Ferrari and you're at a gas station with your $300,000 car and everyone's oohing on, and then you go to get in and it doesn't start. It's just as embarrassing. Right. Oh, yeah. Nobody wants that. And so we like to say, hey, if you just do this, you'll have something that'll treat you well. You treat it nice, it'll treat you nice. It'll do what it needs to do. It's a win-win situation for everybody. And then to be able to support guys like yourself, through just technical stuff. And we try to give you that information to be able to pass that along to the customer, help educate them. And we don't care if it's the brand newest guy, we all spend the time and educate them too, because when they're talking to their buddy that doesn't know anything, or they hear about an issue that someone else is having, they maybe have that knowledge to then, spread it. So word of mouth is everything to us. And that's how we built our brand really globally over the last, almost 20 years.
Exactly. And speaking of technical knowledge, I know I've called you a few times. You and I have had really good conversation. I know that was the first thing I called you about, getting a battery, and we went through it, and that's how we got that G14 LS. When it comes to technical side of it, I have two questions for you. First one is, what is important for a customer to look at when they're looking at the ratings? Because you always see, like, you look at a battery, people are flashing cold cranking amps, amp hours, and like most customers don't understand. All they do is they look at it and they're like, okay, well, I got this one, but this has got higher numbers, so I'm going to take this one. Like, what can you talk about on that to help the customers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do have to deal with that a bit, because the biggest issue is a lot of people do look at cranking amps and they automatically think more is better. The problem is with lithium can deliver a lot more cranking power with a lot less capacity. And so what happens is, it depends on how it's being used, and so a lot of guys will go, hey, I look at your little G5S, which is, just your little tiny Hayabusa GSXR type of sport bike battery. And the cranking amps on that thing is the same as my bigger 15-pound, and this is a 2.5-pound lithium battery. It's the same as this 15-pound Harley Softail 20L, right? Well, yeah, it may put out that burst, but the capacity is how much runtime it's got, how much fuel in the tank. And it's probably the easiest way to explain that. So the problem is, if you crank on it a bunch, you need to have enough fuel in it without fully discharging the battery. So it may start once or twice with a little dinky one, but you're going to run it out of juice and overwork it, and it's going to die. So, capacity is every bit as important, sometimes more so, especially in audio bikes, things like that, where there's electrical demand. You want to look at the true capacity. And you'll see a lot of times there's actual amp hour. And then with lithium, there's with the PBEQ, or a lead acid equivalency rating. And so when it comes to starting, so that graph we showed, when you're looking at how far lithium can go, and obviously versus lead and starting, you can typically, that 1/3 is about the general rule of thumb is that a lithium battery, let's say, at 5 amp hour will have the same starting power as a lead battery that's 3 times the capacity, because you can't use 2/3 of it for starting, right? So you say 5 amp hour can replace 15 amp hour in lead for starting. But if you need to run stuff like a stereo or something like that, you need to have the capacity. So that's where, if you have a 15 amp hour lead battery and a 15 amp hour lithium battery, you're going to get 3 times that runtime, just like that graph shows. If you take similarly, numbered capacity ratings, true capacity, that's what you need to look at. And a lot of them are like pretty tricky about that. Even like a battery tender brand battery, they do the little cheapy lithium batteries too, is they'll do the PBEQ, the lead acid equivalency of a small battery, and say this replaces a 25 to 35 amp hour lead battery, which is typically going to be probably in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 pounds. Pretty big, battery, but yes, it's a little tiny 4-pound lithium battery. But then when you look at watt hours, it ends up only being like 100 watt hour, which is like 7.5 amp hour, so it doesn't have a lot, but a lot of people get confused by that equivalency rating, but that's just for starting, so you got that. And then on the cranking amp side, CA and CCA are definitely something that's totally misunderstood, I think, by most people out there. A CCA rating and a CA rating is a lead acid test, so it really doesn't cross over to lithium for the most part. It's a 30-second draw down to 7 volts at 0 degrees with CCA, or at 32 degrees at freezing at CA. And so just between the two, CA and CCA, there's a 20% margin drop in the cranking power of a lead battery because of the cold. And obviously from 32 to 80, there's about another 50%. So that's why you see cold cranking, is affected. And so that number does make a difference. But in your world, typically in bikes and typically in racing, if you're not running the vehicle, a race car or a driving motorcycle, in freezing temps, which rarely you are, you're definitely not cranking anything for 30 seconds, because if it doesn't start within a couple seconds, there's something wrong. And that rating is down to 7 volts, which nothing modern works below about 10 or 11 volts. So, that whole dynamic, that whole test goes way back in the day when you had to crank, try to get an old car going, and maybe you are using it in the cold. So you don't want to get thrown off by that. Whereas lithium batteries, at least with ours, they'll work all the way down to 0. The difference is with lithium is even on a 32 degree, 40, 50 degree day where a lead battery may have trouble, struggling to start, is that once you turn on the ignition, the lights, and you have stuff running, when it pulls from the battery, it actually warms the cells, and then you get the same performance as you do on a warm summer day. Whereas on a lead battery, when it's cold, you hurry up and hope it starts, because if it doesn't start real quick, it's going to fall on its face, right? So it's totally different. So you want to definitely make sure you're looking at the different numbers. Don't just go off cranking amps without considering capacity, especially when you're talking about, bikes like yourself, like the Indians, Victories, Harleys, things like that. If they need to run stuff, then capacity is even more important, because when you add capacity, you automatically add cranking power. You just don't want to get fooled by something that has just a high cranking thing and say, wow, I can get away with the batteries half the size. Well, that's not necessarily probably the best idea. You still probably want to stick with however much battery you can fit in that spot. For the most part, and get the most power and capacity. It's obviously going to have more power. It'll run things longer. It'll last longer. Trying to go smaller, especially in lead, anything in lead, decrease size, weight, power, capacity. They're all tied into each other. You start decreasing one, you decrease them all. And that's usually not a good way to go. So that ties into kind of what you're saying on the technical side, as far as making a decision. Really with motorcycles, whatever you can fit in that spot, you want to shove in there. Smaller is never a good idea, because obviously, like I said, the difference between a Harley battery and the Victory battery is huge, and the bikes may be totally similar as far as, the engine and the electronics and all that, audio systems. You get a lot of, parallels. But when you have a bike that has half the battery of the Harley, you got to make sure that you get the right one, so you end up having, good performance and reliability.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify for people, when you're talking capacity, you're talking amp hours on the battery, correct?
Yes, amp hour. Yep. So amp hour is capacity. So the best way to look at that, and it makes it pretty easy with like the G30H, is that, you've got a 30 amp hour battery. So think of amp hours as gallons, and then you got a charger. Ours comes with a 6 amp charger, and so the thing is with lithium is it's literally what it's rated at, it will deliver. So if you have a 60 amp hour battery, you ran it all the way down to 10 volts, which 10 volts is considered 0 on a lithium battery, because they stay at 13 the entire time before they drop off the cliff. So when you start seeing that voltage, some guys will play their audio systems and they can tell the voltage starts dropping into the 12s, and it starts getting a little low. Usually it doesn't sound as good. That's usually like, so lead does that fairly quick because it drops in a linear fashion versus lithium. But when you get there, it's like, okay, start it back up. You want to get it, cranked back up. But that's where you want to be careful as far as doing that, because you don't want to run them all the way down, but the voltage will always kick on. So 10 volts is considered 0. So you don't want to take it past that. You don't want to take a lead battery below 10 volts either, because you can cause damage. The deeper you go, the more potential there is for damage, so you can keep it up in that higher range, then they'll last a lot longer, and you'll get that performance out of it. So that's really critical.
Yeah, and I think the second question I had, you kind of already touched on, was batteries in the cold. I know I sent you an email one time because I had a customer, he's in, I think it was Kansas. And his concern was, he's like, well, I've heard that lithium batteries suffer in the winter, which I kind of heard that. I had a sport bike with a battery, but it was a super, super cheap lithium. Yep. But you'd already kind of touched on that as far as like when you turn the bike on, you let your accessory stay on for a few seconds and it warms that cell up. So that's something else I wanted to convey to the customers, is to make sure that just because you live somewhere cold doesn't mean you can't have a lithium.
No, I mean, we've had snowmobiles, we've had Arctic people use our lithium batteries, in freezing temps. So depending on the battery, like our trucking battery has thermal insulation, to keep the temperature retained, to keep the cold from getting into it. If it's something that's like using a semi truck that's under the trailer, things like that, there's different dynamics. But that kind of gets back to also the quality and type of cell. The prismatic cells, like we were talking about, consumer grade, the soft cells, they very much act like a lead battery. So when you talk about the cold and the drop off, very similar, versus the cylindrical cells, like you saw with the graph, is they can obviously go much colder and maintain much higher performance. So there's a big difference. So not all lithium is created equal, both in performance, reliability, but also their ability to work in the cold. So like you said, when you do have a cheaper one, yes, they already got lower performance, and they're definitely impacted by the cold a lot more than ours are. So it's an apples and oranges comparison in lithium, and then also the difference between lithium and AGM or lead batteries too. So, it's definitely something. I've never had anyone stranded, because like I said, if it's something where even a snowmobile, turn on the ignition, the light comes on, wait 30 seconds to a minute, it pulls from it, the thing will fire up, and if it's still a little cold, it'll get faster as it starts warming up, and it'll start it up no problem. Whereas, like I said, lead's complete opposite. Turn it on, hurry up, start, hope it starts, before you're in trouble. So you definitely do that. And then also the flip side is true is heat. Heat kills lead. Lead degrades with heat. Lithium, ours can withstand high temps for sustained periods of time, much higher than what a lead battery can, and would also the same thing with lithium. So we've had them in very hot degrees where they're literally sitting there baked, in some of these race cars next to a turbo and a radiator at 180 degrees constantly, which usually the internal battery will never get that hot in anything else. And they'll still last. It will degrade the battery, because heat will degrade anything, but compared to stuff that's like a lead battery or a cheaper, lower cost lithium one, they just won't handle that kind of demand, those conditions at all.
Awesome. Yeah, I just want to make sure that the customers got conveyed to that correctly, because I see it all over the time on the forums. And actually, you and I kind of talked about it before. Is I did see a post before, and actually wasn't that long ago, of a customer. It wasn't even a customer of mine. I saw a post on the page, and they tried comparing a battery that has a similar case to your guys's. And I know you and I kind of talked real quick, but it's like, just because the outside of the batteries look the same doesn't mean the internals are the same. So I don't know if you want to take. I think you kind of already really talked about that when we're talking about the consumer grade packets and your lithium cells. Is that really the big difference? Is just those internals, even though the outside may look the same?
Yeah, and that's the case with just about anything, is that the quality inside, there's only so many sizes made, and there's only so many case manufacturers. Obviously on the lithium stuff, we've tooled up and we have a lot of our molds, and we've made, our own stuff. So it's very unique to our product exclusively. But in a lot of other things out there, there are so many. When you're talking volume, it's cheaper to get a commonly used case, from even like our early lithium stuff was based on an AGM case. And so we would have to hog them out, because they got dividers for the lead plates and stuff to be able to put a lithium pack in there. But when you had someone who's, making, tens of thousands a month or whatever of these cases, you can obviously just cut costs of that, versus when you have to tool up, make them your own, you're doing lower volume type stuff, which, in the grand scheme of things, we're a much smaller volume than a lot of the big guys that most people know. But we're also at a premium level where pretty much nobody else plays in that sandbox, as far as, really in the world, as far as in our space, the OEMs, the racing, the things we've done. There's really only two of us that play at that level, and the other one's over in Europe. You can't buy them here. Our stuff, we do have distributors in the UK, and we're setting up stuff in the EU now, and we've got Australia and Japan and Germany already set up. So we've done stuff more on a global scale at that high end, that really the other guys are just not interested in making anything that will do that kind of stuff, and so, anybody can go out and create a brand. You can call up, China and say, hey, I want one of these batteries, put this logo on it, and you're going to sell it as whatever you say it is. They don't have their own engineers. They're not putting them together. They're not developing them. They're just buying stuff by the container load and slinging it out there, and they hope it works. And if it doesn't, then they're typically in trouble, which we've seen over the years. Yep. Give it a couple of years, when they all start failing and they can't warranty them all, they usually go out of business, and then they come up with a new brand and they start over again. Versus, yep. We've been at it for 12 years, 13 years in lithium. We've been at it for almost 20 years total. As far as lightweight AGM, the smaller, more high performance AGM batteries. But yeah, for sure, nothing externally based on its size, its look. You got to look down, really comes down to the performance, and they're going to be all over the place, because a guy can sell you a battery that maybe looks the same. But when you look at the cranking amps, the reliability, and then more importantly, the cost, is tied into everything, right? So when you take a AGM or a lithium battery that costs half as much, and then you figure, okay, that's retail, and then a dealer distributor gets their margins, and then the company that's selling is making their margins, what are they actually being made for? And when it comes to lithium, if you have a really cheap lithium battery, it doesn't cost them very much to make, you know. So you're like, what quality do you really expect for something that maybe costs $100 to make? You know, it's like in our world, it's like we've got some of our batteries with carbon fiber and all that, you know, just the case costs more than what some batteries go for. You know, the cells for sure. I can tell you just in general rule of thumb, the consumer grade versus our cells cost about 3 times more than your typical consumer grade lithium cells that are out there, you know. And so it's just, it is what it is. You know, we want the best, so we don't skimp in that area because we don't want failures. We're kind of backwards in the battery world, is that when we send everything out, we don't want anything back. We don't care if it's in a race car, if it's an audio bike. We want to maintain, we're a smaller company, so warranties are not good. You get into some of the other guys, they just keep, it's all about volume. And if they got to replace a bunch of them, they don't really care. And so that is totally backwards. And as you know, just in any performance parts, you know, world, or even mechanics in general, as a shop of any kind, you don't want the customer coming back because it was a bad part. You know, it's like, because now you're eating the labor cost, or you're going to deal with warranty stuff, and it's just, it's not good. So for us, we just rather shoot for the highest, you know, quality, the reliability, performance. And really, guys that take care of them. We've got guys have these G30Hs and, you know, our stuff in their audio bikes for years and have never had a problem. The only time we typically ever see any issues is guys that just don't maintain them, you know. And as you know, anybody can wreck anything. You can put the best parts on it and they can still destroy it. There's just guys that are like that, right? So we try to make it as you know, bulletproof as we can, and for the most part they are. So if you just treat it right, you know, they'll last a long time.
Awesome. I really like that. And that's one aspect I take pride in my business, is the fact of I'm not the cheapest out there because I take so much time into making my products how I want them. And I don't want my customers coming back because something silly failed. So that's kind of where I really appreciate you. And I always try to find these other companies that take that same aspect seriously, because it's important to me. So that's what one of the great things I like about you guys, and why I like to support companies like yourselves. But with that being said, I mean, I don't have anything else for you. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I know you're busy, and obviously you're on the East Coast, so it's already 3 hours ahead of us. But is there anything else you'd like to say, kind of in closing, share with the motorcycle community or anything?
Well, you know, I think it's just, you know, I appreciate you taking the time, and guys like yourself that are out there that are actually, like I said, in the trenches. You're putting stuff together. You want to obviously have the best for your customers. You know, it's like, if I can just warn any customer, whether it's an AGM or a lithium battery, you know, like I said, you get what you pay for. That's just, that is the nature of the beast with batteries. Don't get caught up, especially on the lithium side, of this widget and this gadget and that does this feature. And bottom line is, you want the battery to have power. You want it to last a long time and just work. Don't get sold. The more stuff, the more hype, the more marketing stuff you hear. You know, we don't do that, because we're just like, look at our pedigree and look at who our customers are, listen to them, and they speak volumes for us. So we're not going to give you the runaround or the sales pitch. And so, you know, like I said, we're more than happy anyone wants to call up and just verify they want to get the right one. But that's what we're here for. We're here to help educate. No marketing, no hype. It's education. And here's the pros and cons. Here's the different types of batteries. I'm so glad we have both, because that way we can kind of cover the whole market, you know, and say, okay, you want a better AGM, you want a better lithium. Here's what the deal is. You know, we've been around long enough that we wouldn't be in business if it wasn't what we say it is. You know, our customers, you get a Corvette, you know, racing, this factory team that, you know, it's won Le Mans, won championships and done all that stuff and never had a failure. You know, the first time you have issues with teams like that, or OEMs, they're going to go find somebody else. Right. So you can't have issues. Obviously, the military is a totally different deal, too. You know, when you're doing stuff like that, they can't even buy the cheaper, you know, stuff that's out there. They can't buy Chinese made lithium batteries. They can't put them in their stuff. Right. So, you know, they're looking for the best, you know, and then the flip side is Corvette. I know they've come back and said, yeah, every lithium battery that's on the planet has all come up to them and offered them their battery for free, you know, and they're like, but when you go to Le Mans and you spend $1 million on one race, he's like, the last thing you want to do is take the gamble on a battery that can take you out. And you're going to wish, man, I wish I wasn't cheap, or I shouldn't have tried that cheap one, So, we take pride in that. We're like, wow, that speaks volumes. The crew chief, that promotes us. And, it's been really cool being aligned with the biggest names in automotive. And it's also been the same in your world with guys that are out there, maybe a small grassroots type thing, or maybe, one of these bigger names that are out there. It's getting that feedback, getting the credibility kind of from what they're saying. It has just been awesome for us, so we can't thank you guys, taking the time to do this, to get educated, the Carlos and, all those guys out there, they have huge followings, they have a lot of credibility. We don't take that lightly. And so we want to make sure that we live up to that expectation, and that the customers are happy and that we give them the best product possible.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. And again, like I can't thank you enough for even taking the time, because when you talk about the small grassroots, like that's my business as a whole. We're so small, we're so young. It's just me, and we're growing and growing. And I really look forward to that and continue to use your products and not only educate my customers, but continue to educate myself, because the day I stop learning is the day I might as well just stop the business, because I don't think you probably attest to it. You never stop learning. It's every day it's something new. Sure. And it's exciting. It's what I like. So again, I just wanted to thank you not only for me and my business, but for the new channel and everything. And hopefully this gets out there and it brings up more questions. And hopefully, down the road, you and I are able to do another video with more specific questions from the customers and just try to, get this education out there and get them out at the right direction.
Yeah, that's the key. Whether we do trade shows or events and things like that, we spend our time educating, getting into the technical aspects of it. Bottom line, if someone's going to spend a good chunk of money, buying a lithium battery, or even spending, more on an AGM battery than they could have, with a stock one, we want the customer feeling good about that decision. That it like, okay, it was worth it to them. We like working with guys, and we have shops that are just like yourself. We got the guy that's just a one-man operation. We've got guys that obviously have like 15 employees and they're doing all these custom bikes and all that sort of stuff. But the neat thing is I see the camaraderie in the industry, with guys, especially the guys that are good, that they help each other out. And when you can see guys that are out there, Carlos obviously is quite a staple in the industry for sure. But when he takes the time to educate, everybody, and he can help other guys that own shops to kind of help avoid the pitfalls, to look what, to not have issues and to make the right decisions. He's very much unique, that he likes to see other guys growing and prospering and try to get to the level that he has as well. And obviously that's what we try to do through the product side of it, is saying, hey, anything we can do that makes your business and your customers better, that's a win-win. And that's like, just within racing, we try to always create the win-win situation to where everybody feels happy about, getting our product. And we obviously appreciate guys like yourself that are reaching out and wanting to do stuff like that and promoting our product. So away we go.
Absolutely. And now that you bring up Carlos, it's nice, because in the industry, I got introduced to people that are dealers for you, like Chris Purdue that owns 309 Custom Audio. You got Ariel that owns Breezy Baggers here in Texas. You got Carlos up there, owner MBS Audio in New Jersey. It's like I've kind of gravitated toward these people because, like you said, I've brought questions to them, in a respectful way, and it's a give take. They help me out and I help them out. So it's really great to see that in the industry, not only amongst ourselves, but companies like yourself. So that's really unique to this industry. And that's one of the reasons that I absolutely love it. And I keep on going at it, because you make those connections and you keep on moving forward. So,
well, and like I say, just like in everything, it's who you know, right? So, yep. You get out there, you do the right thing, you treat people right. The bottom line is we can, make the best product, just like you can go out there and do the best work. But ultimately, any business is all about creating the right relationships, both the customer and with other peers in any industry, and so obviously no ego, just set that aside, just deal with the facts. There's obviously colorful characters in any industry. So, you've got that. But I found overall, most of the guys are willing to help each other out, because there's enough out there, there's enough people that you're either looking or needing some help, wanting to know what the best thing is. And it's great for us to get phone calls and say, yeah, I've been doing research. I've heard on the internet from this guy or that guy that this is the one to go with. And we're like, well, that's pretty cool, because we have done zero marketing and yet you're getting that from the guys. So it's factual, you know, and it's not a bunch of hype. So that's cool. It's cool for us.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate it again, Gary. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day, and especially on a Friday. Thank you again. And really hope you have a great weekend. And I really look forward to being able to do this again in the future.
Sounds good. I appreciate it, Brandon. Yeah, if you need anything else, let us know. Or like I said, any customers want to call just to kind of get a second opinion or whatever, they're always more than happy to call us up. We got live chat, email, whatever works, whatever we can do on our end to help you out. More than happy to do that.
Absolutely. We're going to go ahead and put all your information down below, website, phone number, all of that to get the customers in touch with you along with us, and hopefully get them back on the road with solid batteries. So thanks,
Sounds
Gary.
good. Appreciate that. Awesome. Have a good weekend.